home, one of the things that I really loved about homeschooling was that I was able to be so flexible with our scheduling
Mhm.
that I didn't have to fight with everybody else to get after school appointments. I could just say, okay, OT is at 11 o'clock. We'll
Yep.
do some work before, we'll go to OT, we'll come back, take a break, we'll, do some more in the afternoon. That was really flexible.
Welcome to the Homeschool Connections podcast. I'm your host, Kaitlin Zara, and I'm so glad you're spending some time with me today. New episodes drop every week, so make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. All right, mamas, grab your coffee, press play, and let's homeschool together. Today, we are blessed to have author, advocate, and neurodivergent parent coach, Ginny Kochis, on the show. Ginny, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
I am so happy to have you. I think this is such an important and special conversation. I think it's a conversation that is long overdue and on the minds of lots of parents around the country and around the world. So, Ginny, you are such an empowering voice for, as you put it, quirky kids everywhere. So, to start, how do you define the quirky kid?
I think it's any child who kind of thinks outside the box or behaves outside the box. So that's like the broad definition. But I
Uh-huh.
think most kids who think outside the box or behave outside the box tend to be neurodivergent.
Yep.
So that I think is the more granular definition of what it means to be quirky. And these are kids who are intellectually gifted. These are kids who are intellectually gifted and maybe like developmentally delayed,
Mhm.
or kids who are, have learning disabilities. Neurodivergency kind of covers a very wide gamut, but it's typically, um, you can be on the spectrum,
Mhm.
to have, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, even dyslexia, and then there's a whole slew of different diagnoses that fit in within that umbrella. So that's kind of the long definition.
Absolutely. I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful and a great explanation. And I
Oh,
know
good.
that in your work, in all that you do, you often emphasize the idea that being different does not mean broken.
Right.
And certainly there is some feeling around neurodivergent children. Maybe parents are feeling a little bit of lack of support or respect. And you really emphasize that there is no shame in having, of course, a neurodivergent child. So,
Right.
how have your own kids shaped this perspective for you?
Um, it hasn't been. I wouldn't say it's been a smooth road. And I think one of the reasons that I hold on to that, the idea that neurodivergent kids aren't broken, is because I think for a long time I felt maybe that was the case. Um, Certainly, when I was a teacher before I had kids, like, I had opinions about what the different kids were like and what it
Mhm,
meant to be different. But I think that stems from even myself, like, now as an adult, I know that I also am neurodivergent. Like,
mhm,
there's a lot that I think I was masking and just sort of
mhm.
internalized as like, well, I can't be different. I can't let other people know that I do this thing or that I feel this way. So I just had a lot of, I wouldn't say negative, I would just say like preconceived notions
Mhm.
about how things were supposed to be. And so then I had my daughter, and she'll be 19 in December. It's gone by so fast, it's crazy. But she started reading at 4.
Wow.
She's was a gifted artist beginning at 2. She was just had this amazing memory for things, like, if she wanted a particular song, like, she would tell me exactly what track it was, and this was, like, when she
Mm.
was 3, and I would know, and she would say, "Number this," and I would pull it up, and that was exactly
Mhm,
it. She just was also, um, just hard to she didn't like to sleep, she
mhm,
was not a sleeper. She was hard to handle, I think, in some ways.
mhm,
She would have long, long meltdowns. She would not really engage with other kids, she would kinda play
mhm,
alongside them.
mhm,
She was irrationally terrified of baby dolls, but loved
Mm,
dinosaurs and would,
mhm,
like, take care of her dinosaurs like they were baby dolls, you know? So there were different things about her, but because she was my oldest, I was just like, "Well, this is just my kid." So
mhm,
then we sent her to kindergarten at a Catholic school, and, it did not go well. 'Cause I had asked she'd had some smaller issues in preschool, and I had
mhm,
asked the kindergarten teacher, like, at back to school night, "How do you handle it when a child has a meltdown?" And she was young, and she was like, "That's never happened to me." And I knew right then that that
mm,
probably was not the I should have run, I think. I should have, like,
mhm,
walked away and said, "This is not the right place." But I had grown up in Catholic schools. I wanted
mhm,
that for my kids. So we went through with it, and um, suffice it to say, she did not want to follow the directions. She would leave the classroom, run from the
mhm,
classroom a lot.
mhm, mhm.
When she would get angry, she had a very strong command of English grammar, because she went into kindergarten reading The Hobbit. So, like, she understood.
What?
Right, see, like,
That
that's
is remarkable. Can we take a moment to acknowledge how remarkable that is? Wow.
well, and that was, like, one of the things that I really struggled with because I was like, "She's so advanced in all these areas, but she cannot participate in a classroom in a
Uh-huh.
meaningful way."
Mhm,
Um, so that was difficult, and the more behavior issues we began to have in class, the more they would call me and I would hear her screaming in the background,
mhm,
like, it just was. I thought that I had done something wrong. I thought that she was broken, I thought that I
mhm,
was broken as a mom. We had the resource teacher at the school recommended that we go in for an evaluation. I did not want to believe that there was anything, quote, unquote, "wrong" with my
mhm.
daughter. And we ended up doing an evaluation in concert with the public school system.
Yep,
So they did a full a psychoeducational eval
yep.
and identified her under the Asperger's umbrella, which is
Mhm,
no longer used. It's now, autism level 1, not impacting language or intelligence. It's a
mhm,
mouthful. So, I didn't wanna believe it. I we went and got a second opinion, and at the time, there wasn't much really known about girls on the spectrum.
mhm,
They just knew that there weren't as many girls identified as autistic and that boys presented a certain way along the spectrum.
mhm,
So, the developmental pediatrician we took her to was very experienced. But on her like, I remember we were going through all of her paperwork. She's in college now, and so we were going through her paperwork, she and I together, so that she could give that to the university offices for, disability resources. And the, developmental pediatrician was like, "She shows signs of being on the spectrum, however, she also does these things," and she
mhm,
listed off, like, pragmatic conversation, eye contact, all these kinds of things. But that's because she's a girl, which I know now, you know?
mhm,
And so it took me a very long time. I mean, that is how we ended up homeschooling for 8 years. They were, gonna we were thinking that we'd move her to the public school. I wasn't happy with what they offered.
mhm,
So we ended up homeschooling. And over the course of that, and then having 2 more children who subsequently were also neurodivergent,
mhm,
in their own ways, I became aware of God kind of moving in my life,
mhm,
and in my perception of what it meant to be normal, quote unquote, or
mhm,
typical. And so the more I read about it, the more I learned about twice exceptionality, which is, being gifted and developmentally delayed or having
mhm.
a learning disability. The more I began to see kind of wiring as not a matter of like defect, but of like specific design, I guess is what I'm trying to think of how to
Sure.
say it. So that when a child is formed in the womb, God already knows how this child will be formed. And
Mhm,
so, in my mind, that was, I think, the big um, turning point where
mhm,
I let go of the idea of my kids are broken. And I won't say that that thought doesn't, you know, pop into my head every so often, especially when,
mhm,
like, my son has had some troubles over the past like, 4th grade was really hard, and so,
mhm,
I had to challenge that thought process because it's easy to drop back into those old habits, but I think in the long run, nothing that God creates is broken, all of God's
mhm.
creation is good and perfect as he creates
Yeah.
it. So, I think that's why I am so focused on that as
Mhm.
a, you know, as a message, I guess. I don't even know if I answered your question. It was so meandering.
I am so inspired and listening to you could continue to talk for 40 minutes and I will not interrupt, my
Oh,
friend, because I think what you're saying is so insightful. You come from
thank
such a
you.
humble place that I'm listening as our listeners are right now, listening to you for the first time, thinking to myself that as a parent, you are putting me at ease and you're making me feel less guilty for some of the thoughts that I sometimes have.
Oh, sure.
The way that you were speaking so humbly and honestly,
Mhm.
I know that my listeners are doing the same thing I am. They are nodding like, "Yeah, I've had that thought. I've thought these ways." I bet
Right.
we all think these ways about our
Sure.
children at one point or another, no
Yeah,
matter
absolutely.
where they are in their education and their
Sure.
learning. So you absolutely answered my question plus a million. I
Okay,
really want
good.
to take it from the beginning too, because you mentioned that you were, suggested by her preschool maybe to have her evaluated. And I
Mhm,
really want to speak to the parent who's listening, saying, okay, I've got my kid maybe in a pre-K, maybe they're just in classes that we take them to, like a little sports class or a mommy and me, and it's been suggested, or I'm noticing these things just like you are, Jenny.
mhm,
There sometimes is an apprehension to get your child tested or evaluated, as you
mhm.
said.
Yeah.
And some parents think, okay, well, we're going to homeschool anyway. So do I really need to have this evaluation? What do you say to that parent? Emily Brown from Fiat Life Coaching offers premium support for Catholic homeschooling moms to learn essential skills to manage their time, other people's behavior, and their own mental and emotional well being. Get all the details for her signature program, the Happy Holy Mama membership, at fiatlifecoaching.com.
I think, um well, there's a lot. I think, first of all, a diagnosis, I think a lot of people fear that a diagnosis will label their child and that
Correct.
it'll
Yeah.
follow them for the rest of their lives. And I always say that a diagnosis is a tool, not a label.
Hmm.
So it opens doors for you to help your child live his or her best life,
I love that.
whatever vocation God has for them.
Hmm.
The diagnosis will open those doors. So for families that are homeschooling and or even just families in general, um, my rule of thumb is if a child's quality of life is suffering,
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
yes, you absolutely want to pursue an evaluation. If the family's quality of life is suffering because of whatever is happening in the household, and the child seems to be at the root of it, then yes, you absolutely want to pursue an evaluation. If you've got a bunch of kids in the house or a family history of anxiety, ADHD, all the other things, and
Hmm.
you're like, "You know what? I think we probably have that going on too." And things are going fine, then I would say if you don't need access to services, then you can probably hold off. But if you want access to things like occupational therapy, if
Hmm.
you want to do or even like parent child interaction therapy, or some people, ABA is a
Hmm.
very controversial type of therapy. But if are thinking about that, um, having that diagnosis is very helpful. And then once your child gets to college, if that is part of their, particular path, having accommodations in place, like if you plan to
Hmm.
homeschool all the way up through high school, once your high school student graduates, college is a whole nother ballgame. I mean, it's similar in some ways to homeschooling, especially when you get to high school. But if the child is going to go into a classroom and is going to need assistance with note taking, or needs, to have like to be able to record lectures, or needs extended time on projects, or instead of, because professors are notorious for this, just like verbal instructions. If a kid can't handle verbal instructions and they need
Right.
something written, all of that can be put into a student's accommodations. And more universities are availing themselves of building offices of disability resources so that these young adults can say, these are my accommodations. And of course, they have to advocate for themselves. They have to say,
Hmm.
Professor Reed, can I go ahead and take this like extended time on this particular project? Can I have my day and a half extra?
Mhm.
Stuff like that. And then, people argue, well, they'll say, like, in the real world, you can't ask for stuff like that. Well, I would argue that you actually can. Like, you can say to
Mhm.
your boss, okay, this is going to take me this amount of time.
Yep.
I'll have it to you by Friday. But that's kind of going off on a tangent. But I guess my point is, if you are going to homeschool, and I mean, you're asking yourself, is there a point to getting evaluated? I
Mhm.
say, again, if quality of life is suffering, yes. If you want to access services, yes. If you're thinking about down the line, yes. So I think it's helpful regardless, even if you just want to know what's going on with your kid, you know, because
Absolutely.
questioning and, struggling or being embarrassed or ashamed because you think maybe it's just your fault, like,
Mm.
it's not anybody's fault, it's not a flaw,
Mhm.
it just is what it is, and so I always feel like knowledge is power even for the kid,
Mhm.
because for a child to understand, "Oh, I'm not weird. My brain is wired this way. This is why I do this," so to be able to recognize who they are inside and have a name for that, is huge. It's really huge. Like my oldest, she will sometimes say to me, she'll be like, "Are you sure I'm autistic and not just weird?" And I'm like, "Well, you can be both. I mean, we're weird people. This is a weird family.
Mhm.
We're creative, quirky people." Um, but it was a relief to her when I finally kind of at 13 accepted when she was 13, I accepted it and was finally able to say, like, "Honey, the reason you like computers more than you like people is because you're on the autism spectrum." And she
Mhm.
was like, "Really?" Like, it was this huge sort of, like, light bulb went off,
Yeah.
and it made so much more sense to her, and she didn't feel like there was something wrong with her, you
Mm.
know, eh, because social interactions had always been so difficult, and she felt like computers and programming, there was always a predictable response.
Mhm.
And so, like, having that knowledge of who she was, it made it easier for her to understand that she wasn't just some basement recluse, like, she could have friends, like, she could go and make friends and sustain these relationships. She would just have to approach it from a
Mm.
different way. So, yeah. Again, long
Wonderful.
answer.
No, it is such good information, Ginny. And I really want to talk a little bit more about something you mentioned, which was services. So I
Uh-huh.
know you have three amazing children. You've got one in college, one who's in Catholic high school, and you've
Yes,
got an elementary school student who
I
is
do.
in public school. So
Yes.
you have such a wealth of knowledge for our audience because you have homeschooled for 8 years. Now you've got kids in a more traditional setting. You still leave the door open to homeschooling in the
Yes.
future, which I think is so exciting too. So, having seen it all, truly seen it all with public, private, and homeschooling, I really
Mhm,
want to talk about this idea of services. I think that sometimes parents think that unless their kid is in a public school, they're not going to be able to get their services.
mhm.
And I know that there are parents on the opposite end that feel as if, oh, I don't want to put my kid in school, my neurodivergent child in school, because then they're going to be chained to these IEP requirements and these
Yeah.
services. So there's, both ends of the
Sure.
idea that maybe the services are going to be really helpful. Let's get everything under one roof. We can send them to school for the day and they'll get everything that they're entitled to and everything that they need. And then there's the other end that says, let's keep them at home. I kind of want to make my own rules. I want to get services where I see fit. What do you say about discerning where your child should be? You've done it all. You may homeschool again. You've done it
Mhm.
before. How do you know when is the right time to homeschool? And how do you know it's going to be beneficial to your neurodivergent child?
Okay. So let me get this all straight in my head. I think there's a lot of different factors. Discernment, obviously, prayer and talking it over with your husband, your spouse is a
Mhm.
huge aspect of it. Um, I think the the perception that if I were to send my child to school and they would get all the services they need, I think that is not 100% accurate.
Mhm.
Um, Accommodations in a school setting, like you can either have an IEP, which is for like you go through the process of getting the individualized educational plan, and so you do like a psychoeducational evaluation through the school system, or if you have a private evaluation, they'll take it and create your IEP. Your
Mhm.
504 is the other option, and that is for anything that is give a medical diagnosis. So
Mhm.
my two older children had IEPs drawn up by the county. My youngest son, he has had a 504 since he was diagnosed by his psychiatrist, actually, as having OCD and anxiety, generalized anxiety
Mhm.
disorder, which is kind of redundant because OCD is an anxiety disorder. But
Mhm.
anyway, um, he has a 504. Now, in the classroom, those 2 documents are for helping the child access the curriculum in the classroom.
Mhm.
So, providing breaks, they can or even just, like, extra time on assignments. My son, some of his accommodations, he's allowed to bring a plushie to school to hold, like, a comfort
Mhm.
object.
Mhm.
He has he can ask for a break anytime he wants, to go see a counselor, to go visit his, assistant principal buddy that he's close to, whenever he needs to calm down or just take a break.
Mhm.
What are some of the other things in his 504? It's been a while. I can't remember. Um, but my older 2 daughters, I have one with a student assistance plan, and because
Mhm.
she's in a Catholic high school now, so they took her IEP and adapted it. So she has pretty much the same thing. She has extended time on tests if she wants it. She has
Mhm.
extended time on um assignments and projects. She has what's called a flash pass, which is a pass that she can just hold up and then take off and go to the counselor's office.
Yep.
And she has check-ins with the counselor like once a month. And then my oldest had something kind of similar. So
Mhm.
there are times when you can get services in the classroom. Like they can work speech therapy into your IEP. They can
Mhm.
have an occupational therapist come into the school and do occupational therapy there. Um, but that is not the general rule, and it's not always the best option for some of the more like specific therapies.
Mhm.
So you wouldn't necessarily be getting everything all in one place. You'd still have to pick them up from school and take them to the OT practice, or you'd still have to pick them up from school and take them for feeding therapy, or you'd still have to
Mhm.
pick them up from school and take them to physical therapy. Like you never know like what it is, or even just if you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy or to go see the psychiatrist, like you would still outsource.
Mhm.
Um, at home, one of the things that I really loved about homeschooling was that I was able to be so flexible with our scheduling
Mhm.
that I didn't have to fight with everybody else to get after school appointments. I could just say, okay, OT is at 11 o'clock. We'll
Yep.
do some work before, we'll go to OT, we'll come back, take a break, we'll, do some more in the afternoon. That was really flexible. And you can still get access to the same kind of services. You would just outsource
Mhm.
them. The other thing that people don't always realize is that as a homeschooler, if you contact your base school, your local school district, they are required by law to consider the possibility of giving your child an evaluation. And then once they do that for you, if there is an IEP or a 504 drawn up, they can also, in some cases, provide services for you free of charge as a taxpayer. So, like,
Yes.
you can have a public school speech therapist come to your house. So it's always good to like review what's available to you. I think
Mhm.
what ultimately makes the deciding factor for me is what brings the most peace to your family.
Mm.
So, like, when we made the decision to move everybody to school, part of that is because my husband works at the Catholic high school where my daughters went.
Mhm.
And so when my oldest reached 8th grade, I was homeschooling 8th grade, 5th grade, and kindergarten. The 5th grader and the kindergartner were really struggling. My kindergartner is he's now 10, no 11. He's off the chart smart.
Mm.
Like just ridiculously intellectually gifted, and I could
Mhm.
not at that level. It
Mhm.
was mind numbing, like trying to to
To keep
engage.
up with someone so brilliant. I
Yeah,
I
it
can
was hard.
understand.
It was
Yeah.
hard. He needed more stimulation than I could give him, and plus, like, I also have anxiety, I
Mhm.
have my own struggles with depression. I am
Mhm.
probably ADHD, um, I was trying to work from home, and I couldn't. And then my 5th grader was fighting with me all the time because she and I were so much alike. I spent more time fighting with her than we did actually learning anything. And I was like, this is just not working right now.
Mhm.
Nobody's happy. And there was a grieving period. Like because it'd been a part of my life for so long, and I was
Mhm.
even this there was a period of time where I was a homeschool blogger, like, I was all
Yeah,
into it,
yeah.
and, I just decided that I knew in my heart that God was saying, like, "You need a break. You've gotta take care of yourself." And I did. I put the kids in school. I started my own therapy. You know, I
Mhm.
I took kind of a break from everything that I was doing and ended up writing a novel, which I've always wanted to do. And that was huge for me. Um, so yeah, whatever brings your family the most peace. And I think, as my youngest is heading, he's in 5th grade. Middle school here starts in 6th grade.
Mhm.
So, looking at our middle school options, there just aren't a lot that would right now the way with what he faces, there aren't a
Mhm.
lot where he would thrive, I don't think. So, I'm not sure that sending him to school would bring me peace. I'm not sure that it would be peaceful for him. And you can't learn when you're not at peace. You can't teach when you're not at peace. Um, so that's where we are right now, where we're kind of discerning where we might, put him. But yeah, I think that's the answer is, is your family at peace, and what is God putting on your heart? So,
Fantastic. It's such good advice. And I think, again, humble and honest advice is so important. And you're giving it to us straight. You enjoyed homeschooling so much. You said you were a
yes,
homeschool blogger. You were in it, you were living it, you were loving it. But it was okay to take a season of putting your kids in school if it was what was most joyful, if it was the answer that you got in prayer. And like you said, it allowed you to do what you needed to do for yourself to be whole
right.
and to be happy. And now, if that opportunity presents itself again to homeschool, like you said, middle school, that might be something that you guys consider as a family.
Yeah,
You're going to come together again as homeschoolers, probably with a great plan and feeling fulfilled yourself and whole and happy yourself, as I said. And so I think that's really just an important conversation to have. Us
mhm,
moms,
yep,
listeners, give yourself permission to leave your plans open to God's will and to just listen for that voice of what you were supposed to do. And it is okay to figure out in each season of life what's best for your kids and what's best for you and your family. So
absolutely,
important.
absolutely.
So, Jenny, I want to talk a little bit about what I mentioned before, how parents of neurodivergent kids might feel isolated.
Mhm,
And what I mean by that is that maybe you're a homeschooling mom and you're on Facebook and you're seeing every day that feed is just like park meetup here, science class for $10 here, let's do
right.
this, let's do that. And you're looking, going, this sounds incredible. I want to do it all. But is my child going to fit in with a new group of kids? What if their behavior, their manner of speech, whatever it may be, is just different than the others? Should those moms put themselves out there? Should they go to the meetups? Is there any advice that you have for making those meetups and those new friendship connections really successful?
Yeah, I think it's worth going. One of the things that I've learned is that, um, everybody has weird kids because kids are weird. Kids are
Yeah,
strange creatures,
they
they're just
are.
who they
All
are.
of them.
Yeah, and, like, every
All of
child is
them.
weird. Yeah,
Yes.
part of being a kid. Kids are just weird. And so
Adults
that
are too. Can I say that? Aren't we all still weird too? I don't know.
yeah,
I think I'm
yeah.
weird sometimes too.
Well, and I think, there's that every once in a while I see a meme that talks about weird homeschoolers, like weird
Yeah.
unsocialized homeschoolers. And
Yep.
and it's true. Like I think you have to be a special kind of person, to take homeschooling on and to just embrace the lifestyle. So,
Totally.
yeah, I mean I encourage people to go because first of all, you won't know unless you try it. And that's how
Mhm.
I feel about everything, like with school, with therapies, with medications, you won't know unless you try it. And you
Mhm.
don't want to be thinking, I wish I had done, or I wish I had tried, or if only I had, it's better just to go, and
Mhm.
then there are tools and techniques, and I have a lot of resources on my website for this, for helping kids develop appropriate social skills, or even
Mhm.
executive function, like organizational skills, things that will help them in a social environment without causing them to hide who they are. Because I think that's key. Like neurodivergent people live in a neurotypical world,
Mhm.
and I don't ever want one of my children or any of the children of the moms that I work with to feel like, um, they have to change who they are to
Mm.
fit in. Um, but on the flip side, there are standards we have to follow in society. Like you can't go into a theater and scream fire or somebody has a
Mhm.
gun, because that has ramifications, right?
Yeah.
So like it's about it's one thing I actually learned this from my daughter. It's about observing the world around you and learning how to kind of approach it in a way that you feel comfortable, but you also know that you are applying the rules, so to speak, of the society or the culture, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think there are ways, if a child has impulse control issues and is hitting,
Mhm.
well beyond like the developmentally appropriate age for that. There are things that you can do to help your kid work on their impulse control. Obviously, medication is one, occupational therapy is
Mhm.
another, but even just teaching your kid how to recognize his own internal thoughts, working on, working memory, because that is often most kids with impulse control have a deficit in working memory. So strengthening those working memory abilities. So I guess the short answer is yes, go. See how it goes. Probably your child won't be the only one who is different or
Yep.
weird or has issues or does something wrong. I found most of the time, most of the families I've met through homeschooling have almost 99% of them have been just welcoming, non-judgmental
Mm.
people.
Mhm.
A lot of them are homeschooling because they got tired of being judged themselves for other
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
So I think it's helpful to assume the best, assume
Mhm.
competence, assume the best of everyone, and go in with a positive attitude. And then if there's a fire, put it out when it happens.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So,
What do you think? I know we talked about how your advice is to go. Go to the meetup, meet the new
mhm.
people, have some fun. To the mom who's listening whose child has sensory issues, has, meltdowns,
Yeah.
and she's anxious herself about what that's gonna feel like in a new group of homeschoolers when she meets up with new kids and new moms. What do you say to that mom? What is your advice? Do you ever think it's appropriate to preface when you get to the meetup to let parents know a little bit about your kids? Do you wait until a potential meltdown happens? What is your protocol, if you will? What's some good
Sure.
advice for the mom who's like, okay, I'm almost there. My shoes are on. I'm almost out the door. But Jenny, no, I'm really nervous about that judgment.
Okay. So, the first thing I would say is that like moms always know their children best. So
Mhm.
if you and there's always this like gut instinct of like, you know, Henry's having a rough day. Or Sally is just off. She's dysregulated. I can tell this is not a good day to go out. It's fine to skip it. You know,
Mhm.
you just- kid comes first. Even
Yep.
sometimes I think with mass, like a lot of parents worry, like, oh, I can't, they're having a meltdown. There's no way we're going to make it to mass. Do split shifts.
Right.
Somebody stay home with it's not a sin
Yep.
to miss mass if a child is sick. And when a child is having a
Mhm.
meltdown, they aren't sick, but they're incapacitated. So
Mhm.
stuff like that. I think on the other hand, you can always take preventative measures to help your child be prepared for any potential triggers.
Tell
So,
me about
like
that.
taking noise canceling headphones if it's going to be
Mhm.
too loud, or even those loop earplugs. Like I gave my
Yep.
daughter, she was going off to college. I gave her some of the loop engage where you can actually like have conversations with people, but it deadens noise
Mhm.
because,
Mhm.
she's going to be in large lecture halls. There's going to be large events.
Definitely.
I
Yep.
wanted her to feel like she had something she could use to keep the noise at bay if it got too much.
Mhm.
Um, you can have your kid run around outside, do heavy work, all that
Mhm.
proprioceptive input, anything that helps them sort of center
Yep.
themselves before they go and get in the car and go and either sit or participate.
Mhm.
And then I have on my website actually, which is you can get it for free for downloading or for joining my newsletter. It's an
Mhm.
exceptional child information sheet. And so what it is like, you can use it for babysitters, teachers, co-op, leaders, whoever, anybody who comes in contact with your kid. It emphasizes what your child does well, what their
Mhm.
strengths are, things they love, and then it kind of gives insight into areas where the child kind of struggles or things that the kid might have a hard time with,
Mhm.
in a very straightforward, like, hey, here's this information. this is how to have a successful relationship with my kiddo in your class. Um, so doing something like that, like, it doesn't even have to be like, if you don't want to sign up for my newsletter, you don't have to. You can just
We're
make it
gonna
on.
link to everything for our listeners, so you guys will have access to all of that.
Yeah, so but even you could just make it up on your own and say, "Hey, just type up, here's a little bit of information about, Bobby Sue," or whatever,
Mhm.
and then make it like bullet points just so
Yeah.
because I think we tend to wanna tell, like, so much information, and it's
Mhm.
overwhelming. Really, people just need to know, like, the minimum, like, she gets overwhelmed when there's a lot of people. She does really well with, clear directions. She
Mhm.
also does better when she's given choices instead of given a command. Because
Mhm.
a lot of kids, one of the things we're seeing a lot more of is, pathological demand avoidance, which is kind of a subset of autism. It's not yet a
Mhm.
diagnosis in the US, but, it's where kids have, like, a very strong fight or flight response to commands and directions, and they can just really, um, get triggered. I hate to use that
Yeah.
word, but that's essentially what it is. They can fly off the handle,
Mhm.
and be very defiant, very angry, but it's because they are afraid of not being able to meet the demand that has been
Mm.
presented in front of them. So, like, if your child struggles with that, you can say, "Hey, we use declarative language where we say, um, you know, math starts in 20 minutes. It's time to put shoes
Mhm.
on," instead of, "Hurry up, go put your shoes on." Like,
Right.
that's gonna set anybody off, right? Um,
Mhm.
so giving them that kind of information is always helpful, and I've found that most people really appreciate having that kind of insight. Even if your child is neurotypical, every kid has their own little things or, things they like, things they don't like, things they have trouble with, just because, like we said earlier, kids are weird. Kids are kids.
Yep.
Um, so, I think it's okay to preface that, I've done it. I've reached out to coaches. Like my son's golf coach. I reached out to her first about it. Um,
Mhm.
and we tried a ninja gym. I reached out to them.
Yep.
He was great online. When we got there, it wasn't so great. So sometimes you'll find out that it's just not working, and
Yeah.
you have to sort of let go of the
Mhm.
fear of judgment, because if anybody is judging you, that judgment isn't about you. It's about them and what's
Mm.
going on inside of them,
Right.
not what's happening with you and your family. So,
Absolutely. Ginny, I think that is brilliant advice that you just gave that we should have that sheet ready to go. And it's great for sports, it's great for extracurricular
yeah.
activities, but it's great for the homeschoolers who are in a co op. It's great
Mhm.
to just be able to hand over to whoever's going to be working with your child on that first day. And like you said, great for neurodivergent children, great for the average typical child as well,
Mhm.
and everybody in between. I think it's just so important that our educators, the people who interact with our kids, really have that snapshot of who they are when they're
Right.
working with them, because I think we all have individual needs. And when they are acknowledged and appreciated, I just think it makes us all more successful. I think that is
Absolutely.
a great tip. I love that tip. I
Oh,
think
thank you.
that's helpful across the board. I know you mentioned before you were a teacher before you had children,
I was.
and I was too. And I used to leave that on the desk on the first day of school for parents to fill out and then
Mhm.
send back with their kids for the first day of school, because home life and their interests and
Yeah,
their quirks, as you put it, it's so important to learning who they are and then really getting to the heart of how to help them learn.
absolutely. Yeah,
Such a
for
great
sure.
tip. Such a great tip.
Well,
So I
thanks.
know that you homeschooled for 8 years, and I want to know, what are some of the common myths or misconceptions about homeschooling a neurodivergent child?
I think the biggest one is that they won't have social interaction. I mean, and
Mhm.
that's a big myth about homeschooling in general. But I think for neurodivergent kids, it's like the whole idea of they've already got problems with social skills, and you're going to keep them
Yeah.
home. Like
Yeah.
whatever. No, I'm not going to keep them home. I can pick
Right.
and choose what environments are going to be right for my child.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it's not a packed classroom of 25 kids,
Mhm.
and some neurodivergent kids will do fine, in a
Yep.
situation like that. But, like, um, to say that a child won't learn how to interact with others or play nicely in a group, if
Mhm.
they don't go to school is patently false,
Yep.
because there are so many different opportunities for kids to have social, interaction through homeschooling, and I would say probably more quality
Mhm.
interaction. And also, you can come home and just decompress. Like, whereas at school, you can't decompress until you walk out that building just door, or
Mhm.
unless you have an IEP that says you can go to the counselor's office anytime.
Right,
Not every kid
right.
has that. So, um, that would be, I think, the first one. Um, I think for gifted kids, because gifted also is categorized under neurodivergence.
Yep.
There's the myth that you can't challenge them.
Mm.
That is also not true because there's so many. I mean, there are universities that have, just free access online courses. So if your
Yep.
kid is like, you know, 12 and is really interested in quantum physics, I bet
Mhm.
you there's a university out there who has a class on quantum physics that your kid can take free of charge.
Amazing.
There's, co-op classes. You don't have to have like a doctorate in physics to teach your child physics. Like,
Mhm.
or there's, Homeschool Connections, which,
Yep.
offers classes. Um,
Mhm.
there's so many options out there, so you can and you're not capped by the, school system's curriculum. So, you can go above and beyond or sideways even, to whatever your child is interested in, and that's another reason why we're actually thinking of homeschooling because
Mhm.
um his 5th grade teacher was like, we have a gifted program, he's in the gifted program, but it's not enough for him.
Yeah.
Like, this is not challenging him. What is
Mhm.
the most challenging thing for him has been the social aspect and
Mhm.
not having, violent meltdowns and,
Yep.
hitting people and that kind of stuff. That's been the hard part,
Mhm.
not the school. So I would say, the first myth is the socialization aspect, the second is the ability to challenge kids. Um, the third is that they'll fall behind, which I don't think is true either,
Mhm.
because you can tailor your the education that you give your child based on their needs. You could slow down with some things, you can speed up with others, you can seek
Mhm.
out extra intensive instruction for something. And you know what? If your kid just isn't not all kids are suited for the university life. Some kids
Right.
do really well in trades. And,
Mhm.
if that is the case for your child, like they can start getting involved in trade apprenticeships, when they're 16. So
Absolutely.
as a homeschooler, you have more access to that, easier access to that than you might have otherwise. So those are my
Wonderful.
myths.
Wonderful. Absolutely. I think those are some big misconceptions around homeschooling in general and
Mhm.
especially with a neurodivergent child. So Jenny, we talk a lot about homeschool mom and moms in general feeling some burnout,
Mhm.
but we've got to talk more about the blessing too, right?
Sure.
I
Mhm.
want to hear a little bit about from your perspective, what has been the blessing of raising three beautiful neurodivergent children and what was the blessing in that season of homeschooling as well?
There's so much. I think my mom told me I wasn't even married, and I think I might have been in high school still. She said the thing that motherhood did for her was it changed. She became much less selfish. Like she became a better
Mhm.
person once she had kids. And I think I have found that to be true. I it has changed who I am as a person. I mean, I'm still selfish. Like there are still things that I wouldn't say selfish. I'm very careful of my self-care.
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
do I think it's important that I get up and exercise. I think it's important that I
Yep.
get a shower. And I have always felt that way. Like even when the babies were little, like they would be downstairs with me while I exercised because there was
Yep.
no way I was going to make it through the day without having that kind of like physical release. Um I think I don't there's so mu what the blessings are. I think it's taught me so much about who I am as a person, who my husband is as a person, and how God brought us together to raise these 3, um, you know, amazing human beings,
Mhm.
um, to be who they are. And, I wonder sometimes, like, I if I hadn't married my husband and I hadn't had these 3 kids, if I'd married somebody else and had other kids,
Mhm.
um would I be the same person I am today? And I think the answer is no. I don't think I would be who I am. And who I am is who I need to be according to God's will for my life. So um that has been, I think, the biggest blessing.
Mhm.
Is and also just learning how to be more flexible and
Mhm.
patient. Um and just to let things roll off my back. Like, stuff used to get to me so
Yeah.
much. Like, I was always so concerned about what people would think about, appearances, and I don't care anymore.
Mhm.
It is what it is. If you're not okay with who we are and the way we look, then fine, whatever. Just I'll find other friends.
I think
Um,
that's such a gift.
yeah, it is. It really is because it's hard to let go of, especially when I grew up, having to hide so much of who I was because I felt I was weird or bizarre or whatever.
Mhm.
And then I think when I was homeschooling, the biggest blessing was getting to spend time with my kids, even though there were moments where I
Mhm.
was like, there are always children. Children are always around. Don't I don't even have adult conversations anymore.
Yeah.
But it with my oldest in college now, like the idea that you have them really for 18 years and then suddenly you kick them out of the nest and it's like they're on their own, like it's
Mhm.
mind-boggling.
Mhm.
And I look at my sophomore and I think in 2 years she's out of here. And I mean, they're always welcome home. They're not.
Yeah.
I don't really ever think they're out of here, out of here.
Yeah.
But it is quite the sea change. So getting to spend that time with your kids is, I think, invaluable and is not something that you can really take for granted.
Beautiful. So beautiful. I want to share with you before we end our conversation. In
Mhm.
my decade of teaching, I was often given neurodivergent children, and the teachers in the grade below in 3rd grade would say, "Hey, listen, when we were divvying them up, we just knew that this person would be great for you, that you would be," and I'm talking kids who were violent,
Sure.
repeatedly violent,
Yeah.
and big meltdowns, all of the above, all the things that we spoke to. I will tell you that now, those same 4th graders that I had way back when are 19 years old,
Yeah.
and those are the only kids in all my time teaching that I have stayed so close with. I
Mhm.
had brunch with them just a few weeks ago before they left for college.
Mhm.
I have remained so close with them and created the most beautiful lifelong relationships with them.
Yeah.
And one of the moms has said to me recently, "You were the greatest gift to us, Mrs. Zara." And I say, "No, if only you knew." I've told her many times, if only you knew that it's so reversed and that
Right.
you guys were the greatest gift to me, because
Sure.
those are the bonds that I've created with those parents, with those families, and most importantly,
Yeah.
with those kids who are now adults. They have been
Sure.
the biggest gift to me. And just like you said about your own kids shaping you and
Mhm.
making you have this perspective you otherwise wouldn't have, I feel
Sure.
the same way, and what a gift
It is.
our
Absolutely.
neurodivergent kids are, because like I said, they are the ones that I've stayed the closest with, and I just love them tremendously.
That's awesome.
This
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome too. They have blessed me so much more than I had ever could have blessed them in my
Sure.
time being their teacher.
Absolutely.
Jenny, what a fabulous conversation. You've given us so much to think about, so many great tips. I'm going to link to everything that you do online, your social
Oh,
media, your website, those great forums, your newsletter. That'll be in the show notes for you listeners so that you
okay.
guys can get in touch with Jenny, check out everything she does, all those fabulous resources. Jenny, thanks again so much for being here.
You're welcome. Absolutely. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. This isn't the end of the conversation. I want to hear from you. Come say hi on Instagram, connect with me on Facebook, or leave a comment below. I want to know what today's conversation sparked in you. I read and respond to every message. Until next time, remember, you got this.